What's humorous, do you, when people see your Instagram stories or the rare post about a date night? They always assume they know you really know you, however. You might be surprised to learn about the extensive activities that occur in the background. In any case, my name is Whitney, I'm 34 and I live in Indiana, which is one of those places where everything seems the same everywhere you look: drive-thrus, Walmart stores, and cornfields. That's a summary of my life. Chad and I have been wed for 5 years. He's all right. I won't sit here and criticize my spouse or anything. He's a decent man who is trustworthy and stable. He is employed at a hardware store as a manager. It pays the bills, but it's not glamorous. However, when we first started dating, Chad wasn't exactly my ideal partner. I had recently ended a brief with a man I was really in love with, but he had no intention of getting married, to be honest. Waiting around for him to figure it out was too much for my self-esteem. He must have felt safe when Chad arrived. At the time, being married felt like enough, even though he wasn't very romantic or thrilling together. We have had a life. We rent a 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town. It's cozy, but not much. I'm fairly adamant that we don't have children. I've put far too much effort into maintaining my physical fitness since college to simply discard it all due to stretch marks and restless nights. That may sound self-centered, but I don't. After all, it's my body, my decision. At least Chad acts like he's okay with it. To be honest, I believe he simply enjoys evading accountability. The problem is that I've always my ideal life. And let's just say it doesn't involve worrying about grocery budgets or staying up late watching my husband play Call of Duty. Please understand that I like Chad. He's silly, and when I'm feeling down, he'll make me laugh with this silly little dance. However, there are moments when I just stare at him and ask myself, is this it? I mean, am I really married to a man who considers going to Applebee's to be a huge night out? Anyway, the gym can help with that. Although I've always been interested in fitness, I've really stepped it up in the past year. I'm referring to 6 in the morning. Exercise, protein drinks, monitoring my macronutrients, etc. Chad was encouraging at first, but when I started receiving more attention, especially online, I could tell it bothered him. Guys I went to high school with would always comment on my gym selfies, complimenting me on my appearance or asking what my secret was. I could feel the insecurity slipping in, even though Chad would laugh about it. Josh, my gym companion, comes next. He is 29 years old, absurdly fit, and drives a brand new truck that most likely costs more than our annual rent. He saw me doing the bench press a few months back, and we clicked right away. He is self-assured, humorous, and adept at boosting my self-esteem, things that Chad hasn't said to me in years, if at all, including you don't look a day over 25, and you've got the kind of discipline most people dream of. Initially, it seemed harmless, just two individuals exercising together and encouraging one another to improve. Then, however, we began texting. Nothing special, just fitness advice, memes, and the like. If I claimed it didn't make me feel a little giddy, though, I would be lying. Before, I didn't look forward to going to the gym, but now I do. Before I left, I would take extra time to choose my attire or do my hair in case I were to run into him. Of course, Chad saw he's not a moron. I would dismiss his remarks by saying things like, it's the only time I can fit it in, or I'm just trying to stay healthy for us. However, the truth was that I was going for Josh now, not just for my workouts. He would say things like, you spend more time at the gym than you do with me, or do you really need to go that late? You're right, I get what you're thinking. I should not be acting this way since I'm married. But I can't help it at the same time. I feel like I'm being seen for the first time in a very long time. Not just as a wife or a woman who makes sure the laundry is done and the bills are paid, but as Whitney, myself. A woman who isn't simply another dull married 30-something in the Midwest, who nonetheless has a spark and attracts attention. When Chad's friend Tyler joined the same gym a few weeks ago, things began to change, if that makes sense. Tyler is one of those men who is constantly present but never truly in the spotlight. I wouldn't describe us as close, but he's decent enough in any case. When I initially saw him there, I didn't give it much thought. I simply waved and continued working out. Then I noticed that he was observing me, or more precisely, observing Josh and me. At first, I didn't give it much thought, but now I can't get rid of the thought that Tyler might have spoken to Chad. Lately, he has been acting strangely, becoming quieter than usual and devoting even more time to his games. He simply grumbled something about being on a mission. When I asked if he wanted to watch a movie with me last night, I dismissed it, but now I'm curious to see if he's putting the pieces together. I'm not actually doing anything wrong. I am just buddies with Josh, alright, it's innocent. But we could flirt a little. In reality, I never went over the boundary. I do love Chad. But is the desire to feel alive once more really that bad? To feel like someone's wife, but more? Have you ever been walking on thin ice and kept reassuring yourself that everything was great? Since it hadn't cracked yet, I've been experiencing something similar lately, although Josh and I have only flirted thus far. I can already see that things are beginning to veer toward a sticky area. The problem is that, for the most part, I don't even feel bad about it when I enter in the door. Chad seldom glances up from his games and doesn't inquire about my day. And if I'm being completely honest, in his mind, Tyler had repeated it repeatedly. Are you good? I asked, trying to sound casual. As he finally got up and entered the kitchen, taking a soda from the refrigerator without glancing at me. Yeah, he snapped. I shrugged. Why wouldn't I be? He smiled tightly at me and left the living room without saying anything more. You just seem quiet tonight. I realized then that I needed to get ahead of this. It was my responsibility to ensure that I was in charge of the story if Tyler was sowing doubt. When Chad was getting ready for work the following day, I mentioned Josh. I tried to make it seem inconsequential when I added that I had been working out with someone at the gym at first. Chad remained silent and simply nodded as if he was waiting for me to continue. I leaned against the restroom door and murmured, "His name is Josh." Chad stopped shaving in the middle and glanced at me in the mirror. Just a gym buddy, you know? Someone to keep me accountable. I shrugged and forced a laugh. Why didn't you mention him before? I asked. I could see the wheels turning in his head as his jaw tightened, and he said, I didn't think it was a big deal. I mean, you never really ask about my gym stuff. When he eventually said, Tyler mentioned seeing you with him, I felt sick to my stomach, but I maintained a neutral expression. He said you weren't wearing your ring. I rolled my eyes and replied, oh, come on. I take my ring off when I work out because it digs into my finger, you know that. His tone was rougher than I had anticipated, and he yelled back, do I? With my arms crossed, I said, Chad, seriously. You're going to make this a thing because Tyler's bored and wants to stir up drama? It's not about Tyler, he answered with a higher voice. I tried to look frustrated as I groaned. It's about you not telling me about this guy. How long have you been working out with him? A couple of months. It's not like I was hiding it. Chad, you're just so busy with your games, you don't even notice half the stuff I do. That's not fair. He said, staring at me. You could have told me, and you could have asked. I snapped back. But you don't. You never ask how my day was or what's going on in my life. So yeah, maybe I didn't mention Josh. But it's not like you've been paying attention anyway. That silenced him. I knew I had one. And I could see the remorse creeping in. The last bit was obviously a lie, but I shrugged and told him, look, if it bothers you, I'll stop working out with him. But honestly, Chad, I just wish you'd care about my life the way he does. Chad didn't need to know that Josh didn't know anything about my life outside of the gym. Was his fault for not being a better husband. In his opinion, like most of our disputes, it began with Chad silently stewing as I went about my business. Assuming I had diffused the issue, I believed I had played my cards correctly after our brief argument regarding Josh. Chad was different even though he appeared to drop it. When he believed I wasn't listening, he would give me these prolonged, inquisitive glances, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle. He simply shrugged his shoulders and claimed to be all right every time I inquired about his well-being. I believed that I was safe, of course. Tyler had sown doubt, but Chad was now aware of Josh. I had presented it as though I had been honest about everything, and Chad's suspicions were merely the result of insecurities. When you know what buttons to press, men are very easy to control. I believed that all I needed to do was make him feel bad for not being more involved in my life, and the matter would be essentially forgotten. Josh, however, was becoming more confident. He began praising me more, staying a little later after our workouts. I became aware of how checked out we both were at that point. Even though I was already considering my alternatives, I didn't feel bad about it. Didn't I deserve better, more than a life of eking out a living while Peter coasted, more than a husband who didn't care? Then there was Antonio, who was, let's face it, beautiful, focused, and seemed to be everything Peter wasn't. I began working greater hours over the following few weeks. A portion of it was sincere. We were short-staffed and the holidays were approaching. I would be lying, though, if I claimed that. I didn't eagerly await Antonio's arrival each time he entered. A beat skipped in my chest. I began to notice small details, like how he would stand a bit closer, how his hand would linger when he handed me anything, or how he would smile when he saw me staring at him. He always made it a point to stop by and talk. I couldn't tell if he was merely being friendly or if he liked me. However, he took the initiative one day. It felt enormous, but it was subtle. Near the end of my shift, he asked if I had eaten dinner. My stomach turned over when he grinned and said, "Well, maybe you should let someone treat you for a change." Was I being asked out by him? I wasn't sure. But the way he looked at me and said it gave me a sense of belonging that I hadn't experienced in years. I dismissed it with a laugh, remarking that I would probably just pick up something on the way home, although he nodded. He appeared to be trying things out as well based on the expression in his eyes. I kept thinking about him that night, how he made me feel, and how my life might be different if I were with someone like him, someone who could support me, look after me, and not make me feel like I was always struggling alone. The reality is that I've begun to resent Peter, even though I know it's unfair. I'm not at ease with our life. But he is. I'd like more. I'm worthy of better. Furthermore, I'm not sure if I'll be able to resist Antonio's interest, which I believe he has. I kept convincing myself that everything had begun so innocently. A few days after we talked about dinner, Antonio returned to the store. He was even more endearing this time, inquiring about my day and cracking jokes that truly made me laugh aloud, the kind of laugh I hadn't experienced in a long time. Before I knew it, we were flirting. After he lingered once more, it felt good, but it wasn't extravagant. I felt sick to my stomach when he asked for my number. After a moment of dread, I blurted out, "I'm married." It sounded wobbly and unnatural, as if Antonio simply laughed and looked at my hand. "Yes, I sort of guessed." He grinned and nodded at my ring finger. "Friends can also have phone numbers. Therefore, it's all fine." Despite my hesitation, I nodded and handed it to him before I could stop myself. "Yes, buddies," I said again, hardly raising my voice above a whisper. The exhilaration overpowered the guilt, which was there simmering beneath the surface. I told him to text me when he had some free time after he inquired about my work hours. I thought was a significant problem, but he said it in a light-hearted and informal tone. I texted him as soon as my shift ended that evening. "Hey, it's Allison," I typed, my fingers shaking, and he responded almost immediately after I said, "Hey, glad you texted. How was the rest of your day?" We immediately began chatting with him. It was effortless and simple. We had a lot in common, and his quick wit and silly humor made me chuckle. We shared similar tastes in movies and music, and we were able to express our frustrations about our jobs in a way that was therapeutic. Before I knew it, I was opening up to him about how difficult things were at home, how Peter had lost interest in everything, and how he had given up and never tried again. I even called Peter names have dared to say aloud. Antonio simply listened, adding a supportive comment here and there. One evening, following an especially lengthy text exchange, I remarked, "I'm just glad I met you. You make me feel, I don't know, like I matter." His response made my heart skip a beat. I felt more alive than I had in years. "I'm glad I met you too, Allison. I think we're good for each other." In the back of my mind, the guilt was still there, but it was not very strong. Peter obviously didn't care about me anymore, so I told myself it didn't matter. Why should I feel guilty about finding someone who looked up from his phone when he was unable to do so throughout our conversation? Peter, however, wasn't as unaware as I believed. A few nights later, I was in bed texting Antonio and silently laughing at something he had said. I could tell Peter noticed because that was the second time that week. "Who are you texting? You're going to keep me up all night again?" he asked, rolling over and looking at me. "Just my sister," I answered, my voice a bit too high-pitched. I grinned as if it were no deal, and Peter nodded before rolling back over. "She's sending me memes and gossiping about some drama. Tell her to save it for a phone call on the weekend," he said, half jokingly. "You're keeping me up with all that giggling." I thought he had stopped laughing when I forced a laugh. I was unaware that the following day, Peter to text my sister Their connection has always been good, nothing strange, just pleasant enough to joke about. In a lighthearted message, he said, "Hey, save the memes and drama for a phone call next time. Allison's keeping me up all night laughing about it." Her response was prompt. "What are you talking about?" Peter clarified. And her perplexity increased when she subsequently texted me to ask. I was devastated since she had no idea what he was talking about. Peter had already connected the dots by that point. His piercing, inquisitive gaze on me that night gave me the impression that he was waiting for me to make a mistake. When my sister told me to keep her out of whatever was going on, I tried to seem normal and dismissed it, but I knew deep down that Peter had suspicions. Everything fell apart the following evening. Peter abruptly reached over and grabbed my phone out of my hand as I was grinning at it and texting Antonio on the couch. I ran to get it back and yelled, "What the hell, Peter?" But he held it out of my grasp. Although his tone was calm, there was a hint of humor in it that made my stomach turn. "What's so funny, huh? Let's see what's keeping you up all night," I tried to sound when I said, "Give it back," but my voice betrayed my panic. After unlocking my phone, he began to browse through the messages, his expression hardening with each one. He said, "So this is who you've been texting," as his voice became louder. "This Antonio guy. Talking about how I'm lazy and broke, calling me ugly. You've been flirting with this guy, saying how glad you are you met him while I'm sitting here, thinking I'm in a marriage. Are you kidding me?" I stumbled. "Peter, just relax. It's not what it looks like," but he didn't believe me. He angrily said, "Shut up," in a voice that was shaking. I started crying. But it was from getting caught, not from guilt. "Just shut the hell up. I don't want to hear your excuses. You don't get it, Peter. I've been miserable for years. You don't care about me, you don't try, and you don't even notice me anymore." He shook his head and chuckled cruelly. "Oh, so that's why you're talking to some other guy? Because I don't notice you? Maybe if you spent half as much energy on this marriage as you do on texting him, we wouldn't be in this mess." I exploded. "What marriage, Peter? There is no marriage. I'm tired of being with someone who doesn't have his life together, who doesn't care about his appearance, and who doesn't even try to make me happy." Antonio made me realize I deserve better, and I do. His expression contorted in shock. "You're actually ridiculous. You think you deserve better? You're the one who put us in debt. You're the one who spends money like it grows on trees. And now you're blaming me for everything wrong in your life. Allison, are you crazy?" I snapped because I had no response to that. At least Antonio sees my worth. At least he makes me feel special, which is, I'm starting to hate the sight of you. You disgust me. You're broke. You're ugly. And you don't even want to try to do better. You're okay with being a bottom, and it's pathetic. Peter's steady, cold voice fell. "You're mad at me for catching you cheating. You're mad at me for reading the texts where you trash talk me to some other guy? You know what, Allison? I don't even care anymore. I stopped loving you the second I read those messages." The words hit me like a slap. But instead of feeling hurt, I felt anger. "Fine. Maybe we should get divorced. Maybe I should go be with Antonio because he's everything you're not." "Do it, Peter," I shot back, standing up. "Getting out of my life. I don't even care anymore. You're not worth it." He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "To the bar, to your buddies," I sneered, hoping to get a rise out of him, but he just looked at me, his expression a mix of disgust and disappointment. "You're not even worth a response," he said flatly, slamming the door behind him so hard the whole house seemed to shake. For the first time in years, the silence felt deafening. 3 weeks after Peter stormed out, we finalized the decision to divorce. There wasn't a screaming match or dramatic confrontation by then. We both knew there was no saving the marriage. The damage was done, and we had grown too far apart to even consider patching things up. Still, as we sat across from each other at the lawyer's office signing the paperwork, I could feel his disappointment radiating. He looked at me like he was seeing a stranger for the first time in years. I saw a glimmer of the love he used to have for me, but it was buried under layers of hurt and betrayal. "I did love you," he said quietly, almost to himself, as we gathered our papers. "I really did." I didn't know what to say. A part of me felt guilty, but I quickly pushed it aside. This was for the best, I told myself. We weren't happy. I deserved more. At least that's what I believed at the time. 3 months later, I was happier than I'd been in years, or at least that's what I kept telling myself. I moved out of the apartment Peter and I had shared and into Antonio's place. It was everything I thought I'd wanted, a fresh start with a man who seemed perfect. Antonio and I were great together, or so I thought. I worked less because he could provide for us, and I felt less stressed about money for the first time in years. I started gaining a little happy relationship weight, but Antonio didn't seem to mind. If anything, he said I looked even better with a little softness. We spent our weekends trying new restaurants, going to wine tastings, and planning vacations. It felt like a dream. He even dropped little comments about how he could see us getting married someday. We'd be good at it, he said once with a smirk, making my heart flutter. I thought I'd finally made the right choice. I felt like I was young again. Like life was finally going the way it was supposed to. The stress, the resentment, the constant worrying gone. I told myself this was my reward for walking away from a relationship that was suffocating me. I felt alive, and then one day, everything came crashing down. It started small, a few missed calls, a shift in Antonio's behavior. He'd suddenly seemed distracted when we were together. His phone always faced down on the table or tucked away. At first, I brushed it off. He was a busy man with a demanding job, I told myself. But the signs became harder to ignore. One night, he went out with friends and came home late, reeking of cologne that wasn't his. When I asked about it, he laughed it off, saying someone at the bar spilled their drink on him. Something about the way he said it made my stomach twist, but I didn't push. I didn't want to seem paranoid. A week later, as he was taking a shower, I noticed a text message flash across his phone from an unknown number that said, "Last night." Was amazing. I wanted to think it was a misunderstanding, but deep down I knew. When I finally confronted him, he didn't deny it. He admitted he'd been seeing someone else, a younger woman he met at the gym. "It's not serious," he said, as if that, but it wasn't just her. As I looked further, I discovered there were other people too. Antonio, the man I thought was ideal, had been juggling multiple women the entire time we were together. I felt like the ground had been torn out from under me. I had left my marriage for this man, believing he was everything Peter wasn't, only to discover he was a liar and a cheater. I packed my things and left that same night, my heart broken. "You're an amazing woman," he said, as if that were meant to lessen the blow, "but you know I'm a catch. These things happen." The following weeks passed in a blur of regret, anger, and self-loathing. I deleted my social media accounts because I was too ashamed to face the world, and couldn't bear the idea of anyone witnessing my ideal relationship end so quickly. The same friends who had encouraged me to leave Peter were now silent, and I felt as though I had nothing and no one. I returned to work and took every shift I could to divert my attention. But the nights were the worst because I would lie in bed and stare at the ceiling, while mentally reliving everything, though it wasn't enough for me at the time. I kept thinking about Peter and how he used to look at me. I began to see our marriage differently, understanding that although he wasn't perfect, he had been honest, never pretending to be more than he was, and loved me in his quiet, straightforward way. I had thrown everything away for a one-year fling. I was in my late 30s now, and the idea of dating again made me feel sick. I kept thinking, what if no one loved me again? What if Peter was the only person who ever really cared about me? These thoughts gnawed at me, and no matter how hard I tried to ignore them, they consistently returned. One night, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone, pictures of Peter and me from when we first got married. We looked so happy, so hopeful. I started crying, not just because of what I'd lost, but because I'd thrown it away without even trying. I have no idea how Peter is doing. We haven't spoken since the divorce, and I don't have the courage to reach out. Part of me hopes he's doing better, that he's moved on and found someone who appreciates him in a way I couldn't. But another part of me hates the thought of him being happier than I am. As for me, I'm still working on paying off my personal debt. I've started to rebuild my life piece by piece, but it feels like a hollow victory. I thought leaving Peter would be the start of something better, but now I can't help but wonder if I made the biggest mistake of my life. Maybe he's out there now with someone who loves him for who he is, someone who doesn't need him to be perfect. Or maybe he's still at the bar with his friends, laughing and drinking, not giving me a second thought. Either way, he's probably better off than I am, and honestly, he deserves to be.